Sarah Ruhl's Eurydice is a modern, feminist reimagining of the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, centering the experience of Eurydice rather than that of her mythic husband. Traditionally, the myth is told through Orpheus's journey to the underworld to retrieve his dead wife. Ruhl, however, gives Eurydice her own voice, story, and agency, exploring themes such as the fragility of memory, the power and limitations of language, the complexity of love, romantic and familial, the meaning of death and loss. Ruhl combines surreal theatricality with emotional resonance, creating a play that is philosophical, poetic, and deeply human. She also injects elements of absurdism, dream logic, and humor, blending ancient myth with modern sensibilities. Characters: Eurydice, a young woman who is newly married to Orpheus. Curious, intelligent, and emotionally complex, she is the play's protagonist. Orpheus, Eurydice's husband, a musician who loves music more than words. His attempt to retrieve Eurydice from the underworld drives the plot. The father, Eurydice's deceased father, who resides in the underworld and regains his memory and voice upon her arrival. The Lord of the Underworld, a surreal, menacing figure who appears as a child on a tricycle and later as a sinister lover figure. He enforces the rules of death. The stones, big stone, little stone, loud stone, comic and chorus-like figures who comment on the action and enforce the silence of the underworld. Act 1. Life and Death. The play begins with Eurydice and Orpheus on their wedding day. They are deeply in love, but their different ways of communicating, his music, her words, create small frictions. Eurydice feels anxious about marriage and misses her deceased father. While at the wedding reception, Eurydice encounters a strange man, the Lord of the Underworld in disguise, who claims to have a letter from her dead father. Lured by curiosity, she follows him, but when he becomes threatening, she tries to escape and falls to her death down a stairwell. Act 2. The Underworld. Eurydice arrives in the underworld via an elevator that rains down water. She has forgotten everything, including her name, language, and life. She is greeted by the stones, who insist she remain silent and accept death. Her father, however, breaks the rules and begins to rebuild their connection. He constructs a room for her with string and teaches her words, stories, and memories. Their relationship becomes the emotional core of the play, a tender reunion between a father and daughter who defy the boundaries of death through love and language. Meanwhile, Orpheus mourns Eurydice and writes her passionate letters, which he sends to the underworld. The Lord of the Underworld intercepts the letters, but they eventually reach Eurydice and rekindle her memory and longing. Act 3. The Journey and the Choice. Orpheus descends into the underworld and convinces the Lord to let him take Eurydice back, under the classic condition: he must not look back at her until they are both out of the underworld. Eurydice is torn between Orpheus and her father. As they ascend, she calls out to Orpheus. He turns, and she is lost to him forever. But instead of rage, the moment is filled with ambiguity and yearning, an impossible choice between romantic and familial love. Final scenes. Forgetting and letting go. After the failed escape, Eurydice and her father gradually prepare for final forgetting. The father erases his memory by dipping himself into the river of forgetfulness, Styx. When Eurydice returns, she finds he is gone. She writes a letter to both Orpheus and her father and enters the river herself. Orpheus later dies and arrives in the underworld, but memory has faded. When he finds Eurydice's letter, he cannot read it. Language and identity have vanished. The play ends with loss, but also with gentle transcendence, a meditation on the impermanence of memory and the persistence of love. Major themes and analysis. 1. Feminist reimagining and female voice. Traditional versions of the Orpheus myth present Eurydice as a passive figure, defined solely by Orpheus's love and loss. She is silent, spectral, and barely present. Ruhl gives Eurydice her own voice, desires, and questions. She is intellectually curious, emotionally ambivalent, torn between love for her husband and her father, able to make choices, even tragic ones. By centering Eurydice's perspective, Ruhl reclaims the myth from patriarchal narrative structures, insisting that women's experiences of love, death, and language deserve complexity and visibility. 2. Language, memory, and identity. Language is central to Eurydice. In the underworld, the dead are expected to forget language and memory. The stones enforce this silence, mocking and chastising speech. However, the father resists. He writes letters, builds runes, teaches Eurydice her name. For Ruhl, language is the medium of love, connection, and identity. When it is lost, people lose their sense of self. Eurydice's struggle to remember who she is, her name, her father, her husband, becomes a metaphor for how memory constructs personhood. Her eventual choice to forget is both heartbreaking and peaceful, a surrender to the inevitability of loss. 3. Father-daughter bond. One of the most poignant elements of the play is the relationship between Eurydice and her father. Their reunion in the underworld offers a rare chance for intergenerational healing, one denied in life. Their scenes together, building a room with string, learning words, writing letters, are delicate and tender. The father is a nurturing, literary figure, full of warmth and quiet wisdom. This bond complicates the classic narrative. Eurydice's choice is no longer just between life and death, but between romantic love, Orpheus, familial love, father. Ruhl thus reframes the story not as a love tragedy, but as a meditation on how love in its many forms competes, overlaps, and sometimes conflicts. 4. The limits of love and the ambiguity of choice. Orpheus's journey to reclaim Eurydice is heroic and beautiful, but also doomed by its conditions. He cannot turn to look at her. This metaphor becomes a meditation on the difficulty of trust, the human desire to confirm love through vision, the impossibility of reclaiming the past. When Orpheus turns, he loses Eurydice again. But Ruhl presents this not as failure, but as inevitability. The past cannot be re-entered. The dead cannot truly return. Similarly, Eurydice's call to Orpheus may be interpreted as a plea to break the rule and test his love, a subconscious desire to stay with her father, an acknowledgement that she no longer belongs to life. Ruhl allows these interpretations to coexist, embracing ambiguity rather than clarity. 5. The absurd and the surreal. Though filled with emotion, Eurydice is not naturalistic. Ruhl incorporates an elevator that rains water, a tricycle-riding lord of the underworld, talking stones, spatial and temporal dislocation. These surreal elements create a world that operates on dream logic, where metaphor and myth blur with reality. The underworld is not just a place of death, but a psychological space, a theater of memory and emotion. This style invites audiences to experience the play not only intellectually, but viscerally, much like a poem or a dream. Dramatic techniques and style. 1. Poetic language. Ruhl's writing is filled with repetition, ellipses, lyrical images, childlike simplicity. Her dialogue often floats between the literal and the symbolic, allowing actors and directors interpretive freedom. This style emphasizes emotion over exposition and feeling over plot. 2. Visual metaphor. The play is rich with visual motifs. Water suggests forgetting, rebirth, and cleansing. Elevator rain, river of forgetfulness. Letters represent the persistence of language and emotional reach across worlds. String symbolizes memory, connection, and the fragility of constructed spaces. Ruhl uses theatrical imagery to evoke internal states rather than realistic environments. 3. Chorus and meta-theatricality. The stones function as a chorus, reminiscent of Greek tragedy but reimagined with humor and cynicism. They comment on death, memory, and the absurdity of speech. Their role reminds the audience that this is a myth retold, a play about storytelling itself. Comparative mythological context. In the original myth, Eurydice dies from a snake bite. Orpheus sings so beautifully that Hades allows her return. Orpheus looks back, and she vanishes. In Ruhl's version, Eurydice dies by accident after being tempted by curiosity. Her father exists in the underworld, complicating the stakes. She is not merely passive, she calls out, perhaps knowingly. Ruhl preserves the bones of the myth, but gives it emotional nuance and psychological interiority. Her version critiques the patriarchal simplifications of classical myth, offering a woman-centered perspective that adds depth to an old story. Critical reception and legacy. Eurydice has been widely praised for its inventive use of myth. Emotional resonance. Theatrical innovation. It is often taught in theater programs for its blend of lyricism, feminist theory, and theatrical form. It continues to resonate with audiences for its relatability and depth, especially in exploring parental grief, love and separation, the metaphysics of death and memory. Ruhl's Eurydice joins a tradition of feminist reinterpretations of myth, like Carol Ann Duffy's The World's Wife or Margaret Atwood's Penelopiad, positioning myth not as static truth, but as a living text for reimagination. Conclusion. Sarah Ruhl's Eurydice is a profound and poetic reimagining of a classic myth, transforming a tale of male heroism and female loss into a nuanced meditation on memory, identity, and the many forms of love. Through its dreamlike structure, rich metaphors, and emotional core, the play offers a deeply human portrayal of death, not as an end, but as a realm of longing, choices, and unfinished conversations. By giving Eurydice agency and voice, Ruhl critiques traditional narrative frameworks and offers a more inclusive, emotionally complex mythos. Eurydice is not just a retelling, it is a reclaiming, and in doing so, it becomes a story of becoming, belonging, and letting go.